Alright, it's 12:30 and the existential dread is starting to set in, so it's time for the contrarians to come out. Based on age demographics and my present but dwindling faith in YouTube's algorithms, I'd bet that if you're watching this video you fit into one of two categories. A, you are slowly fading under the crippling weight of your student loan debt, or B, your parents are. If you fit into either of those categories, then don't worry, I'm writing that millennial age gap too. Call me. A murder-suicide pact is only a dial away. Odds are, though, that you've also probably played Dark Souls. Now don't worry, I know that just name-dropping Dark Souls is enough to make your eyes roll so far into the back of your head that you're rediscovering repressed childhood trauma that you kept buried deep in the soft, succulent folds of your hippocampus for years.
So what do you say, young Padawan?
Who said I'm a Padawan?
But I don't intend to dwell on the subject. There's nothing that can be said that hasn't been said already, and nothing I honestly want to say about the subject until I can hire a fully armed security detail. But there is one signature aspect of Dark Souls' combat that happens to be relevant to our discussion, that being the stamina bar. Dark Souls isn't the first game to implement a stamina bar, not by a long shot. That title goes to Heavyweight Champ way back in 1976. The concept of a stamina bar mechanically is pretty versatile. Different genres and even different games within those genres are going to use it differently. In action RPGs before Dark Souls, it was typically used to represent your character's physical limitations and, eventually, their physical growth. While more commonly, it's used to limit player mobility. When Big Bad Chad on the playground is bigger, stronger, and generally more manly because he hit puberty 2 years earlier, your only chance is to utilize mobility. Now, unlike me, this usually manifests itself in the player character with more practical abilities, like a dodge roll or a jump that has invincibility frames. So instead of letting Chad force the player to lick the Twinkie cream out of his foreskin for all 3 years of middle school, the player can avoid this and a number of homoerotic nightmares that plagued them for years in the absence of proper therapy thanks to the tools provided to them by the game's combat mechanics. The drawback is that these high mobility tool sets can be heavily exploited. You probably already know this if you've seen high-level play of any multiplayer game that's ever existed. Before Dark Souls, the traditional solution in action RPGs and action games in general was to limit the available consecutive evasions until it culminated in a state of high vulnerability and immobility for the player character. Instead of relying on convention, From Software implemented a stamina bar to not only limit player evasion, but also available aggressive action after said evasion. Now, I'm not going to dig on anybody for treading new ground. I also happen to be a professional new groundbreaking ground treader. In fact, I'll be moving forward with clinical trials soon on my peanut oil-based anal lube. It helps with the smell. Now, I already said that stamina bars have their purpose in action RPGs to signify character growth physically. The issue with Dark Souls is that you never get past that. All the way through the end game, the stamina bar remains a liability in combat. In Dark Souls' case, this just happens to work out, creating tense and methodical combat scenario. But you can't catch lightning in a bottle. And as I learned from my doctor after a tragic bridge jumping incident in which I was the only survivor, when there are trendsetters, there are trend followers. Now, I could go on and on all day listing Dark Souls imitators to the point that there is essentially a subgenre in the same vein as Metroidvania. These aren't the problem. I can judge them case by case and determine their quality on their own merits. The real problems are games that imitate Dark Souls in superficial manners for marketing purposes.
Listen, being chased by monsters, this is the Dark Souls of arcade games.
For example, Vampire. Vampire is a game whose quality is undeniably mediocre in pretty much all aspects of its production. The real nail in the coffin of my experience with the game was the combat system. Bullet sponge enemies and a nonsensically weak character despite what the game wants us to believe.
A strength I never knew I had. This shouldn't be possible. Every sinew, every fiber of my being is afire.
Already make things pretty tedious. Combine that with the two facts that the enemies are incredibly stun resistant and our main character is limited by a stamina bar, and you'll start getting flashbacks to your old GBA days jerking off to Lynn.
I feel like a child learning the limits of my body.
And I have no beef with the fact that they're mimicking Dark Souls either. I feel that the stubborn implementation of the stamina bar in Souls games in general is a weakness. It's a mechanic in a broad sense, even outside of Dark Souls, even outside of Vampire, exists solely to limit the player's capabilities. In worry of creating a game that's too easy, or enemies that are unthreatening, developers will implement a stamina bar instead of just making the game harder and faster. It really says something when Call of Duty of all game series is one of the first to learn this lesson. More recent Call of Duty games threw out limited sprint in favor of wall running and higher mobility options on top of unlimited sprinting. This created a faster, more challenging, and more successful gameplay style. If you want to hear me splurge about anything, bring up Devil May Cry, but it's also pretty relevant that Devil May Cry handles high speed, powerful characters while also implementing difficulty in an engaging manner. In any of the games, regardless of character played, invincibility frames are stuffed into rolls and evasions, but also leave the player open immediately after said dodge, unless perfect timing is performed. This means you still feel the tension and threat, but are also rewarded for high reflexes and learning enemy attack patterns. Before I get too caught up in
Pulling my devil trigger.
there are a few games that kind of ride the line, having stamina bars, but either implementing it understandably or just having it not matter at all. Games like Dead Island and Dying Light encourage the player to be creative with weaponry by implementing a stamina bar that reduces the effectiveness of successive melee attacks. While games like GTA or Prey hardly even utilize the stamina bar to the point where it may as well not even be there. I guess in the end what I'm trying to get at is I don't really hate stamina bars, more lazy implementation by game developers. You could say that I'm being nitpicky, or even that I've got way too much time to think about this kind of thing. Or if you're my landlord, you could tell me to get off the balcony, put some clothes on, and drop the kid. I've kind of lost the point here. I don't know what I'm really getting at. But I guess in the end, the real stamina bar was the friends we made along the way.
Nine, 1, 1. Better put this baby on high.
君が行く道を遮る重く虚しい戦続こうと夢を殺すな夢を生んだ遥か銀河の輝きを映す涙で
That was eating the wrong carrot. So
喜べる日を光の橋を越えて心を裸にして光の橋を越えて涙と愛を時